Okay, so I thought we'd start the bread making video on a discussion of pans because it's really going to determine how much dough you make at a time. This right here is what you call a standard loaf pan. This is what is this one? This is a 5.5 by 9 by 2.7 inch, basically Pyrex loaf pan. And this is the one I make regular bread in a lot. Now, as you can see, this pan here, which is much longer, right? It's also taller. Also, the bottom is narrower, right? This is only like a 3-inch bottom, where the standard bread pan is nearly a 4-inch bottom. You know, or maybe even this one's even a 5.5-inch bottom. Yeah, this one's a 5.5-inch bottom, so this one's really wide. But I found I like the higher sides because it helps the bread rise. Gives the bread support, especially if you're doing like a rye loaf or a whole 100% whole wheat flour loaf. They don't have as much gluten in them, so they need a little bit more support while they're rising. So I don't like these bread pans for that. I don't think it gives you a very flat loaf. It doesn't look good when you slice it for sandwiches or toast. So I don't use this one. I really like this bread pan. As you can see, it really supports the bread nicely, and it rises up, and it makes a very attractive sandwich or slice of toast. So this is a very large bread pan. It's very long. I got a really long one because they don't have any of these in like standard loaf size. Short, I haven't been able to find them. Now you can find these bread pans here. This is just like a cube. It's tall, it's straight, mostly straight, has maybe just a little bit of flare to it. And these ones also come with lids. I found these are called Pullman pans, and I actually make the gluten-free bread made with rice flour in this because it doesn't have any oven rise or gluten in it at all, so it needs a lot of support to rise. You could do sourdough in these. It's nice and tall. This would work fine, but I didn't like the width of it. And then this is a little loaf pan. This could be a little bit taller. I don't use it that much. I got one of these pans to try out, and I didn't like it so much. I liked it better than the silicone bread pan because the silicone bread pan just wasn't strong enough to support the bread. It kind of moved sideways as much as it moved up. But this is a smaller, this is like the size of the loaves that I gave to Mom. Would come out of a bread pan this size. So, depending on, now this big loaf here, I'll make it and I'll slice it into like 30 slices and freeze them. And then I can pull the slices out individually for Sophie. It helps keep me from eating so much bread. So that's good. Now, the bread pan you're using is important for how much dough you're going to make. And of course how well your bread rises. So if you had a big pan like this, I actually put this loaf here was 5 pounds of dough. This one here I would probably use, let's see, yeah, I'd probably use 2.5 pounds of dough for this one, and then this one is about 1.25 pounds or so of dough. So, depending on what size bread pan you're going to make, will determine how much kefir you start off with. So, to make 5 pounds of dough for this big monster right here, I would start off with 4 cups of kefir. Each cup of kefir makes about 1.25 pounds of dough, generally. So this one I would start off with 4 cups of kefir. This one here I would start off with at least 2, maybe 2.5 cups of kefir. And then this one would be like just a cup of kefir or You know, maybe just a little bit more than a cup of kefir, but just about that much. Okay. Okay, so the next step, after you chose the size of bread pan you're going to use, I'm going to go ahead and try one of these size loaves, this Pullman loaf. And I'm going to try it with just 2 cups of kefir, which is half of what the big loaf is. That should be sufficient. I haven't made one in this pan for a while, so this will be an exciting adventure. Alright, so I'm going to start off with 2 cups of kefir for this bread pan right here. So here's some kefir. I just pulled it out of the fridge. It's been sitting in the fridge in a jar for a while. It's cold. If you start with kefir that's still warm right after it's been out on your counter working, you know, your bread making process will start a little quicker, but it doesn't matter. It'll go just fine, even if you start with cold kefir. So I'm going to start with 2 cups, more or less. And that's about the only thing I measure. That and the salt, of course. Alright. Now, so there we go. Now, I'm going to do what's called a sponge method. So I'm going to take my liquid, which is this right here, the kefir, and I'm going to add a portion of my flour to it, which I'm going to use whole wheat flour. Now, of course, you can use rye, you can use the white flour for this, it doesn't matter. Any flour is fine. So then what I'm going to do, all I'm going to do is add flour. I'm not measuring it, I'm just scooping it, right? Because what you want to do is just add flour till you got like a thick kind of pancake consistency. And if you want to measure this on subsequent times you make bread, so you know about how much to add, you can go ahead and do that. If you're trying to make bread for like production baking, then you would want to do that so you would know. So I just add flour and I mix it up until it gets like a thick pancake. And all we're doing here is we're just jump starting our wild yeast and lactobacillus. We're just growing that culture so that our bread will raise a bit faster. The main thing is you do not, so that's probably good. I could probably put a little bit more in there if I wanted to. Either way, how much you put in here isn't really critical. If you want more wheat in there, put more wheat in there. Okay. The main thing is, do not put salt in here. When you put salt in with your bacteria or your yeasts, you know, it slows down their reproduction. So see, that's like a thick pancake batter. Right. So that's about the consistency you want. It could be a little bit thicker too. And then I just stick it on the counter. You can put a piece of plastic or anything over it there. Yeah. And you let it sit for 12 to 24 hours. If you started off with warm kefir, 12 hours is probably sufficient. If you start out with cold kefir, 24 hours is about sufficient, and it's also depending on, you know, how warm your house is. You don't want it to really be above 85 or maybe 90 degrees at the outside. If it gets warmer than that, it's not good for your kefir. It's a room temperature kind of thing. And I think you can tell that it's gotten a bit foamy here. Let's see. Yeah, So you can see some air bubbles in there. All right. Should smell, well, yeah, see? Now the volume's reduced and you can see the bubbles. All right, so you can tell that it's been nice and active. It smells fruity, fermenting. Shouldn't smell like mold or anything. That would be bad. All right, so now this is good. This is ready now. Now, you can see it's down. Okay, so the way I have started doing this is you're going to add, basically you're just going to add flour, you're going to add your salt, and then you're going to keep adding flour to this until it forms into a bread dough, right? And you can do that little by little as you go. But since I've made bread so many times, I know about how much dough I'm going to end up with. With 4 cups of kefir, I end up with about 5.25 pounds of bread dough. And so for these 2 cups, I'm guessing I'm going to get about 2.5 pounds of bread dough. So I'm going to actually use a scale. So, alright, so I'm going to, now if you weigh this or if you don't weigh this, you do this the same way. I like to put a little bit of flour in here to start off with. And then I like to add my salt to the flour. I don't want to just dump the salt into the kefir mixture because salt actually, retards yeast and bacteria and everything. That's why we use it to preserve food. So I like mixing it in with the flour rather than adding it to the kefir directly. This is sea salt. And if you use a chunky salt, like a kosher salt, you have to use a little bit more. If you use like a regular iodized salt, I would use a little bit less because that stuff always tastes saltier. As you can see, here I added a little bit of flour to the bottom of the bowl, and then I put in 2 teaspoons of salt because I used 2 cups of kefir originally. Right? So then I like to just mix this up a bit, just so that kefir's not getting a great big shock of salt, concentrated salt. Okay, and then I like to have flour all over the bottom of the bowl, just makes it easier to mix. When I last left you, I was adding the kefir to the flour, and I did that, see? I added the kefir to the flour, and then I just started mixing it up with the spatula, see? And I just wanted to mix it up with the spatula until it started to get stiff and I could start working it with my hands. Dough. And this is just regular unbleached flour. Alright, so I'm going to attempt to pause the video and take this over to the table where I like to do the kneading. Okay, so I like kneading the bread on the table here because the table is about waist high, right? So that way you can put the full weight of your upper body onto the bread. Just makes it easier to knead. Alright, I'm sure there's lots of videos on YouTube about how to knead the bread. And I usually do it with 2 hands, but see, this stuff isn't very sticky on the outside right now. So what you want to do is you want to like fold it and push it. And sort of spin it and fold it and push it. And just keep doing that. And if it starts getting sticky, then you add a little bit more flour. And you keep doing this until it forms a nice big mass that's elastic and and it's not sticky and doesn't stick to your hand. See, it's still sticking to my hand. I'm going to add another handful of flour here. And this kneading can take anywhere from like 10 to 20 minutes depending on the amount of bread dough and how fast and how hard you knead. And what you're shooting for is for your bread to pick up everything in the bowl and to clean it all up so your bowl looks clean and you have a big mass of bread dough in the middle of it. Let's see. this, see how that fingerprint stays in there like that? So that's still a really soft dough. I just wanted to show that for comparison. And the other thing I wanted to point out with this dough is you want to try to work your dough as dry as possible, because if you're going for a gluten-free thing, when you go to work your dough to put it in the bread pan, you don't want to add any more flour to it, right? Because that flour then wouldn't have all of the time to ferment that all of this flour is going to have, because this flour is going to have, you know, it's going to rise in the bowl for 12 hours and then more or less, and then 12 hours more or less in the bread pan. So this flour is going to have a full 24 hours to ferment. And if you added a bunch of flour when you know, if you didn't get your bread dough worked up the way it needed to be after the first rising, you would have to add more flour if it's sticky. And then that flour that you add is not going to have 24 hours to ferment. It's only going to have like 12 hours. So I try to work it up just as dry as I can, because as the little beasties respire, your little yeasties and your lactobacillus, you know, they consume the starches and give off carbon dioxide and water. So your dough becomes a bit wetter the longer the yeasts work in it. So if you start off with kind of a soft, wet dough to begin with, then it's going to be kind of a sticky mess when you try to put it in the bread pans. I've worked it for a few more minutes. It's not quite ready yet. I just wanted to show you. See, you stick your fingers in it, and they're still not. See, its fingerprints are still staying. You can see it's kind of sticking, wanting to stick to my finger. Right, it's picked up all the flour in the bowl, but it's like trying to stick to the bottom of the bowl. Yeah, this isn't done yet. You need to add more flour to this. You need to work in some more flour. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so I've kneaded it for a couple more minutes. I added a couple more handfuls of flour. You can see it's not really sticking to the bowl that much. If you've got it, you should be able to work it and not have it stick to the bowl. Actually, it should be pulling up all the stuff off the bowl. I'll call this pretty good, and it's hard to tell in the videos, but it rebounds more when you poke it now. The fingerprints aren't coming all the way out, but they are bouncing back when you stick a fingerprint in them. So I would call this pretty much done. Alright, so you turn it over so you've got put all of your foldy parts down. You want it to trap as much air as possible. And then all we do is, I just leave it right in the bowl. I don't bother to do anything. Then we just put it back on the counter, and we cover this. I'll have to get some plastic wrap, and I'll just cover this whole bowl with plastic wrap and leave it until, let's see, it's 11:30. So tonight, the last thing before I go to bed, I will make this I'll put this in the loaf pan, and Okay, well, here we are. It's almost bedtime. I put a little coconut oil in my pan, just because I do this on a baking sheet. It's a clean surface. And here is the dough. As you can see, it looks fluffier. It's risen. It kind of smells fermenty. Feels nice. That looks good. Okay, so just gonna so when you're doing this, you always want to be making it into a ball. You don't want to fold it one way and then turn it over and fold it the other way. You want to keep all your folds on the same side. So you have a nice smooth side that's going to be up. That's stretching those gluten fibers and making your gluten structure better so that it can hold more carbon dioxide in, right? So just working around a little bit. Alright, so there's lots of different methods to make it into a loaf. Kind of just roll it up like that, like you would like a snake. So, you know, that's too long for my loaf pan, but you always kind of need to fold your ends in a little bit. Said, keep all your folds on the same side, and that's the side that's going to be down in the pan. And like this. The stove is a little wet. Okay, so I think I'm going to have to, see, that's still a little big. The stove is wet. So when you're making the big loaf pan, you know, it's almost the size of this baking sheet. This is a large baking sheet. Okay, so fold your birds like that. Then like this, and like this. Oh, I think this one's going to do it. Okay, I'm going to put this down for a second and put this in the pan with both hands. And indeed, look, there it is. It's all in the pan, and that's it. That's all you do. Okay, so here we are. It's the next morning. Well, yeah, it's still morning. It's only 11:30. Here's the bread. This one's just sitting out on the counter. You see it's risen up that far. It's what, about there? So it's risen up quite a bit. This bread does have a lot of oven rise to it, it's called. When you cook it, it will raise in the oven. So it's going to be a bit taller than this when we're done. You could leave it longer till it rises more, but you also can run the risk of over-rising your bread, and then the structure becomes weak and it'll actually fall in the oven, right? So you can't leave it too long. Generally, if you start seeing like splits in your dough, you let it raise a little too long. To encourage rise in the oven, what I do is I take a thin, see, I love this knife, a thin bladed knife, a thin sharp bladed knife. Normally you do this with a razor. I think it works a little better if you wet it a little bit. And then you slash the top of the bread. Cut pretty deep too, and that, because otherwise if it tries to rise it could burst out the sides. Okay, and then I actually normally I have a mister, right, but my mister is broke, so I haven't replaced it yet. So I spray it down and get the top nice and moist. That's going to keep the crust on the bread flexible, so it'll help it rise more. Alright, my oven is already preheated to 350. So I'm going to take this bad boy, see, with its gash on the top, and put it in the oven. Okay, now I put water, I missed the loaf 2 or 3 times in the beginning of it baking. So I'm going to set the time for 5 minutes, and at the end of that 5 minutes we're going to come back and we're going to mist the top of the loaf again with water, or sprinkle water on it because my mister's broken. Okay, so I don't know if we got the first one, but here's the second time. This is the end of the second 5 minutes. Let's take a look at what we got here in the oven. Oh, see, it's starting to open up. There still seems to be plenty of moisture on there. Give it a little bit. This Pullman loaf pan, you see it's risen quite a bit. It's up almost to the end. This Pullman loaf pan has the advantage is I can slap the lid on it and it'll trap that moisture in there. So I didn't put too much on it because it still had a lot on it. That's how I'll just put the water in the oven. Alright, we'll set it for 5 more minutes. That'll be the third set of 5 minutes. I usually go 3 or 4. I rarely do that 5 times. So this will be the third time, and then when this 5 minutes is done, we'll decide what we're going to do, if I was going to go again or not. Alright, so I'll see you in 5 minutes. Okay, so the third set of 5 minutes has passed, and I've managed to keep my video going this time. So let's open it up and see what it looks like. Oh, that, Donald Trump's calling. See, that's risen up quite a bit more. That's good. So I'm going to put a little bit more moisture on the top of this loaf. Like I said again, this is better done, especially get some in the middle there. Keep that moist. So this has risen up quite a lot. You can see it's almost up to the top. I could put the lid on this and just let it finish cooking. But since it's already risen so far, and with the amount of moisture we have on top, I'm not sure that it would cook right. So I am going to call this good. Woof, God damn. So I'm going to set my timer now for 45 minutes. On my great big bread pan, I will cook it for an additional hour. Since this one's a little smaller, I'm just going to set it for 45, and then I'll check it. All right, and we'll see what we got in 45 minutes. Here we are. 45 minutes is up. Let's see what we got in the oven. Get my Oh, that looks nice. Look at how much it's risen. See? Look, it's up above the pan. I'm going to pop this out. I'm going to have to put the phone down for a second and pop this out of the pan. I need 2 pans to do that. Hopefully it'll pop right out of the pan. Alright, so I think it's going to pop right out of the pan. There was just one little bit stuck because of the water I put on it. So let's see what the crust looks like here. Oh. That looks nice. You hear that nice hollow drummy sound. Alright, we'll call that done. Turn my oven off. And then we will get my out here. That's the good thing about using these non-stick pans. They come out, but don't wash those things. Just wipe them out. So, there we go. There's our loaf. See how much that opened up on top from splitting it? If I hadn't split it, see what happens is it rises from the top and then it'll like burst over here and get a big crack and a burst, and it looks like it's got tumors then sometimes. See, that looks like a nice bread. Okay, so I've done everything except the reveal. I let the loaf cool a bit. Gotta see if I can get this set up. Get this to. There we go. Ah, there we go. Alright, let's see if we can get that. You want to cut it. You want to use a nice serrated knife. You should probably let it cool a little bit more. But there we go. Alright. Okay, you can see some bigger holes. You can see some smaller holes. Yeah, I maybe could have cooked this a little bit longer or left it, pulled it out of the pan and left it in the oven a little bit longer. I don't think it would have hurt it any. So this looks like it'd be a nice loaf of slice of bread. It's mostly rectangular. If you'd put the lid on it, it would have been, you know, a square or a rectangle. So this looks pretty good. Here, let me taste it. I'll tell you how to taste this is. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, I could have left it back in the oven a little bit longer. The crust isn't as thick as I normally have, but that's not a bad thing. All in all, it's a good loaf of bread. And it's mostly gluten-free. I have celiac friends who can eat this bread, even though the people on the celiac list will scream at you if you offer it to them, some of them anyway. You know, it may be possible for people to indulge occasionally that are gluten sensitive. I don't know. Your mileage may vary. So good luck and enjoy.